Integra is perhaps the second most legendary name in the Acura portfolio, only behind the Acura Legend, and for 2023, Integra has returned. This new Integra is going to essentially replace the ILX in the Acura lineup, and this is their entry-level luxury sedan in America, designed to do business with the BMW 2 Series, the Mercedes-Benz CLA, the Audi A3, and yes, even something like the Lexus UX, even though this is a sedan, and that is trying to be a little bit more of a crossover meets hatchback. Up front, we have the very distinctive Acura design language here with this big pentagonal grille. Different elements than we find in the rest of the lineup like the TLX, etc., but very distinctive and familiar headlights. Digging deep into the nostalgia files, Acura even puts Integra on the front bumper, and they're very proud of the fact that this is one of the very few entry-level luxury vehicles that has fog lights. These are full LEDs down below. Let's talk about the elephant in the room up front. Yes, the Integra is related to the Honda Civic. So what? Every Integra has been related to a Honda Civic. That's always been the positioning of this vehicle, and it's not unique in the luxury segment. The Lexus UX is related to the Toyota CHR, the BMW 2 Series is related to the Mini Cooper, and the Audi A3 is of course related to the Jetta and the Golf. So absolutely no problem in my mind for the Integra. But the Integra, like those other luxury relatives, shares no sheet metal directly with the Civic. It also doesn't share any glass either. It certainly has this long hood profile that we also find in the Acura TLX, but I actually think the Integra wears it a little bit better than the TLX. The profile and the proportions of this vehicle are a little bit more pleasing to my eye. Another way to look at the Integra is as an upgrade above the Civic Si. We have a very similar drivetrain under the hood, 6-speed manual available here as well. Wide tires, 235 with grippy all-season tires. There's an optional 18-inch wheel available in this trim. But obviously the Integra is going to be sold at a luxury car dealership, and it's going to have a luxury car warranty. It's also going to be a sportback or a liftback, whatever you want to call this particular design. That makes this much more cargo practical, and I also think definitely sleeker than the Civic. Now, coming around the back, we have some very attractive full LED tail lamp modules. I have to say, I really love the design that Acura has done to the Integra. I was a little bit concerned when I saw some initial renderings of this, but in person, everything really comes together. I also like this homage to previous Acura models where we have that little cut in there for the button to release that hatch, and then we have dual exhaust tips down here at the bottom of the bumper. If you're looking for an entry-level luxury vehicle and you want a bit more room, you should put the Integra on your shopping list. This is about 10 inches longer than the Audi A3. And most of that difference in terms of dimension happens right back here in the rear seat, where we find significantly more rear seat legroom, and back here in the cargo area where we find about double the average cargo area that you'll find in the competition. And even about 25% more than we find in the Lexus UX, even though ostensibly that's supposed to be a crossover. For the new Integra, Acura has borrowed the engine essentially out of the Civic Si. Under this hood, the 1.5-liter turbo produces 200 horsepower and 192 pound-feet of torque. That's definitely a departure from what we found under the hood of the ILX that actually had a naturally aspirated engine borrowed from a Civic Si before it went turbo. There are two transmissions on offer. The 6-speed manual is available only in the very top-end trim, so keep that in mind. All the other versions of the Integra are going to have basically the same continuously variable automatic we find in other Honda models, although obviously retuned and tweaked software-wise for the Integra. Fuel economy is going to be the best in the CVT model, 33 miles per gallon combined there. Lowest in the manual transmission model, that drops down to 30. As we see throughout the Acura lineup, the Integra comes with a ton of standard driver assistance tech. Blind spot monitoring, radar adaptive cruise control, their aggressive lane centering system, etc. All those features are standard on every model. And that is significantly more standard equipment than we find on a BMW or a Mercedes or an Audi competitor. Really, the only things that are optional on the Integra are things like the front and rear parking sensors that this top-end trim has. And if you choose the manual transmission, then you do lose two features. You lose the low-speed follow assist for the radar adaptive cruise control, but it still has radar cruise control, and you lose the traffic jam assist, which gives you more aggressive steering in low-speed stop-and-go situations. One reason to get the Integra over the competition is for the bigger rear seat area. The rear seats are wider, and we get more legroom than we find in most of the competition. Oddly, however, no air vents here in the center console. I do think that's a pretty big miss, because on a hot day like it is today out here in Texas, it's nearly 100 degrees. I'm melting back here, and I really don't get much air. And headroom in the back is pretty similar to most of the competition. I can't really put my head back there to the headrest unless I crane my head to one side, but sitting in a more natural position where I would probably be sitting, I have maybe a half an inch of headroom left, but my head is really resting on the back portion of that roofline. The rear seats fold in a 60-40 fashion. We have a center armrest and two cup holders, no ski pass-through, however, and the only lever for lowering the rear seat backs is right on the seat back itself. Acura did an excellent job designing this vehicle's sportback or liftback. We don't have any visible hinges on top, and that really gives it a very clean look when the hatch is open or when it's closed. Now in here we have over 24 cubic feet of storage space. That is more than double the average for this segment. The A3, the CLA, the A-Class, the BMW 2 Series, etc. And even still more than we find in small subcompact crossovers as well. And that's because even though this is competing with subcompact entries like the CLA and the A3, this is based on a more compact car platform in the US. So it's definitely larger, and a lot of that extra size goes back here to the cargo area, both in terms of length and width. If I take this 22-inch roller bag out of here and take a dive under the load floor, we also find enough room for a spare tire. Interestingly enough, no spare here in the Integra, but I suspect one would fit because obviously the Civic gets a spare, and we even have a spare tire mounting point. Why Acura did not give us extra storage space, I don't know. This foam divider actually is pretty bulky, and it does give up a lot of that extra space, so you can actually use that entire area right there around where the tire would go. On the inside, the Integra borrows a little from here and a little from there. This is where we have the controls for this moonroof. It's a pretty standard sized unit, just over the driver and front passengers' heads. There's also a sunglass holder, and the sun visors do slide. Over here you can see the optional speakers for the ELS audio system. This is only in the top end trim. These modules are a little on the bulky side. I'm surprised they weren't a little bit better integrated with the roofline. The driver and front passenger get height adjustable shoulder belts, height adjustable headrests, and this is the optional red interior. No leather available in the Integra, interestingly. So all models are going to have imitation leather if you get this top end trim. Then we have faux suede inserts in the middle. In this trim, the front seats are heated, but ventilated seats not available in any version of the Integra, at least for the moment. On the front doors, we find soft touch materials on the upper section of the door, color matching inserts right there in the middle, the ELS audio speaker right there for that optional audio system, also speakers on the A-pillar, and speakers behind this touchscreen infotainment system. This is an optional 9-inch screen. The base versions of the Integra will have a smaller unit. One thing you'll really notice, however, is that this is not the same system that we find in the rest of the Acura lineup, because it is a touchscreen rather than using the touchpad controller. I find this a lot easier to use, so this is certainly my preference. You'll notice that there are definitely components shared with the Honda Civic, just as we've seen in every version of the Integra that has come before, so the air vents are quite similar, but we don't have that bar that runs right across the dashboard. I have to say, I do kind of miss that bar that we find in the Civic. I really find that a very classy look. In here, we have sort of an imitation metal trim panel right there instead. Dual zone automatic climate control, the controls for the heated seats, one USB input for the infotainment system, also some USB charge only ports. This system does support wireless CarPlay, so you don't have to plug it in if you don't want to. The wireless charging mat is large enough to accommodate some of the larger smartphones. We have some driveline controls here, and of course, manual transmission shifter, because this is going to be available in the top end trim. It's a no cost option. We have 2 cup holders here and a pretty decently sized storage compartment for such a small vehicle. Standard in all trims is this just over 10-inch LCD instrument cluster. You can see that pretty much all the gauges are right here on the LCD, except for fuel level and engine temperature. Those are LED gauges on either side of that display. This top-end trim also has a fairly small but very crisp heads-up display. One nice touch is that this is actually projected on the windshield. It's not projected on a small piece of plastic that pops out of the dash or anything like that. The steering wheel is a round design with some small sport grips up here. You'll find controls for the infotainment system over here on the left side, the radar adaptive cruise control, which is standard over here on the right side. If you're watching a bunch of different Integra reviews, I'm pretty sure that most people are focusing on this 6-speed manual transmission. And at least at the beginning, this is supposed to be the most popular transmission in the new Integra, which is an interesting twist. Acura said that, I guess, about 60% of initial reservation holders opted for the row your own transmission. So Brian, you daily drive a Veloster N, which is definitely a more performance-oriented vehicle than this, but logically a competitor to the Civic Si, on which this 6-speed manual transmission is based. How do you think they compare?
Right, well, actually, surprisingly, the Veloster N, the clutch pedal actually is kind of light. It's not the most difficult to push down on in the industry, so I feel like comparably it's pretty close to this. This is a very easy transmission. It's a generally pretty short throw in terms of the shifting action.
This is a good feel. Like, the engagement's really nice. It's easy to tell exactly what's going on.
Yeah. And of course it has rev matching, so if you're around town downshifting a lot and you don't want to have to do all the extra work, it'll do it for you, and it does it pretty quickly. That is one thing with my car. You can't adjust how quickly it does upshift or downshift when you do the rev matching. Here it's just whatever the car has defaulted to, and it's good enough for me. So.
Yeah, and I do like where reverse is located. It's over to the right and down where reverse should be, and you're an evil monster if you prefer reverse to the left and up. I mean, I just don't know. Yeah, so sorry, Brian, you're an evil monster in your Veloster N. That's just not right. This is exactly where reverse belongs. Obviously, you're going to have to wait until I get this at home for our official 0 to 60 and 60 to 0 scores, but you can expect the manual transmission version of the Integra to be about the same 0 to 60 time as the Civic Si because it's about the same curb weight. This may be a little bit heavier, but same transmission, same engine basically under the hood, and the variable involved is going to be you shifting the transmission. One key difference between the manual transmission and the automatic transmission version is that we have a limited slip differential in the manual transmission model, and that is going to make it feel a little bit different. You're going to get a little bit less torque steer, but there is still plenty of torque steer to be found, even with the wider tires that we find on this model.
One thing that I've noticed, I don't know about you because I know you've spent more time with the new Civic, but Honda did say that the structure of this one is actually 5% stiffer than the hatchback and 2% stiffer than the sedan. I don't know if that contributes at all to the sound that I'm hearing or the tautness and nimbleness of the car, but there are a lot of elements going on here, including premium materials and more sound deadening that makes this a little bit quieter on the inside. But
yeah, it definitely comes across as the more premium option, which is already saying something since the Civic feels very grown up in its own right. And they said this is also several hundred pounds lighter than the BMW, the Mercedes, or the Audi. And I would agree that it does feel like that out on the road, even though this doesn't have the same tire sizes that you do find available in some of those German options, and no summer tires here, you could easily swap those on. It has a really nice feel to it. It still is front heavy, just like you'd expect in a front wheel drive vehicle. And in those corners, it's still gonna head for the bushes if you try and push it a little too hard, especially if you try and give it power while you're pushing it around the corner, but it still has a good solid feel to it. Now, the first thing I noticed out on the road with the CVT is that the starting ratio and the final drive ratio aren't as aggressive as with the manual transmission, so I think that might be part of why we don't find the limited slip in this one. I noticed that leaving a driveway with the steering wheel cranked to the right, there really wasn't much front wheel slip because there's just not enough oomph down there at the bottom.
Yeah, it's not a super darty experience. It's not, you're not going to get that oomph until you've gotten up to about 20 miles per hour, I would say.
Yeah. Quite different than like the TLX with the 10-speed automatic. That is a super aggressive first gear. I mean, it wants to peel out left, right, and center, and this feels a little bit more muted down there at the bottom. I would say this is not too far off the 8-speed Isonaut we find in the BMW, but definitely not as slick as the DCTs in the Audi or the Mercedes.
The neat thing about the transmission is if you put it in manual mode to shift for yourself, it actually won't force you into a downshift. If you floor it in, say, the 7th simulated gear, even all the way up there, it'll actually hold the ratio you're at. Now, it will force you into an upshift in other situations, though.
And it's interesting that there aren't too many situations where it really behaves like a CVT. Right. And it does not feel like a Nissan CVT or an Infiniti CVT. It definitely has a unique feel to itself.
So what you're saying is for the average buyer, someone who would just go straight for the CVT, this is really not a deal breaker for them?
I would assume so. Obviously you're going to have to drive all of the alternatives back to back to really decide which one fits you best. But honestly, I don't think that there's a problem with the Integra having a CVT, and I wasn't expecting that to be the case going into it. As with every Integra that has come before, the new 2023 model is a really good deal. It starts at $30,800, which is thousands of dollars less than the Lexus, the BMW, the Audi, or the Mercedes. And it comes really well equipped as well. We get the imitation leather upholstery inside, we get standard Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, a 7-inch LCD, and a power driver's seat, although not the same driver's seat that we have in this trim. The next step up from there, if you want extra paint colors and extra interior colors, is going to be the A-Spec trim. That's $32,800. That also gets you the exterior styling that you see in this model, more or less, 18-inch wheels and tires, and LED fog lights up front. Now, if you want everything on your Integra, that's the model that I've been driving today, and that is the model with the tech package. The $35,800 tech package model is the one that you're going to get the manual transmission in. You can actually choose whether you want the CVT or the manual for the same price. It's also the one that gets you the adaptive suspension, the upgraded 16-speaker audio system, heads-up display, the larger 9-inch infotainment system, 12-way driver's seat with 4-way adjustable lumbar support, wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, the front and rear parking sensors, ambient lighting on the inside, and a power passenger seat. Although the top-end version of the Integra is the most expensive, it also is, interestingly enough, the best value, because compared to a comparably equipped BMW or Lexus, this is going to be at least $6,000 less expensive, and compared against the Audi, interestingly enough, and the Mercedes, this is $7,000 to $10,000 less than either of those options, depending on exactly how you have the model configured. And we have about the same kind of power, lighter curb weight, and actually slightly better performance, depending on exactly which metric you're looking at. The only big difference for some shoppers is going to be that we don't have a dual clutch transmission under the hood like we find in most of the competition. We have a continuously variable automatic. And I know that's going to be a deal breaker for some folks. It is one of the best CVTs available in North America, as we find in the rest of the Honda lineup that uses the same CVT. Gear shifts are actually pretty quick. It feels more like an automatic transmission than you might expect. but it isn't going to be as exciting as the dual clutch that we find in the A3 or the Mercedes-Benz, but it is going to be considerably smoother than the DCT that we find in the Mercedes. That DCT is honestly pretty rough around the edges. This comes across as more luxurious and actually a little bit smoother, interestingly, and this is the only one that's going to give you the option of a manual transmission. So if you want to row your own, there's only one way to go, and that is the new Integra.
Now it's time for our new segment called Would You Buy It? Is It Worth It? Alex, Audi A3 costs $7,000 more. Would you get it over this?
Ooh, that is a tricky one. I think I would buy the A3 over this, but I would say it's not worth it.
Yeah.
$7,000 more expensive than a comparably equipped model. I do like the way the A3 looks and I like the way that it drives, but it's not a good value.
Right. Okay, moving on. We have the BMW 2 Series, and I'm talking about the 228i Grand Coupe, which is $6,000 more than this car.
Ooh, that is trickier, actually. I kind of like this more than the 2 Series, so I would buy this. Is the BMW worth it? I would also say no.
Okay. Now moving on to the Mercedes-Benz CLA 250. Keep in mind, there is no more A-Class in the United States, just CLA. Yep. And that car costs $9,000 more than this.
Yeah, that is a tricky one. I would say no and no. The herky-jerky transmission in the CLA is my biggest complaint with that model. Be it Mercedes' newest dual-clutch transmission is definitely a lot better than their older model, but it's still not as smooth. $9,000 is a lot more. I mean, that's, 33% more, so no.
Now, last but not least, sort of an oddball entry in this list is the Lexus UX. Hybrid only, it's kind of a hatchback crossover thing. It's about $6,000 more than this. What do you think?
Yeah, I was quite surprised by that because in my head, I thought surely the UX is less expensive. That's how I remembered the Lexus UX. And actually for $6,000, there's no way I would buy it over this. The UX is more efficient. I mean, it is a hybrid. It uses the Prius hybrid drivetrain, which, let's be frank, is a little on the boring side. But it is going to be fantastically efficient compared to this, so at least 10 miles per gallon better in real-world driving. Oddly enough, it's a hatchback, but it has less practicality and less cargo room than we find in this. It has significantly less legroom as well, and I really find the interior to be not aging as nicely as I would like it. Let's put that gracefully for Lexus there. So $6,000 more, no, I wouldn't buy it, and no, it's not a good deal. Yeah,
one other thing to consider, all those models that we mentioned are available with all-wheel drive. The Integra is not, so that is another factor to consider.
Yep, so if you're looking for all-wheel drive, the Integra cannot be on your shopping list. You will have to upgrade into something like the TLX, and that's definitely a different kind of value proposition. But with that out of the way, let me know what you would pick down there, and would you be willing to pay that much extra for an A3, a 2 Series, a CLA 250, or a Lexus UX? Or would you be cross-shopping something more like a Mazda 3 perhaps over this Integra? Let us know down there, hit the subscribe button, find us over at Facebook, Instagram, all those other social places. We'll see everybody next week.